Operation Last Domino, March 25th briefing. My name is Daniel Vallis and welcome to our channel. I do not know the day or hour, but in this video we're going to put all of our notes on the table and discuss where things appear to be going based on what we see. The Bible tells us there will be specific calls for peace and safety that tells you that sudden destruction is coming. It's coming upon all them that dwell upon the face of the whole earth. It's going to be a sudden destruction. We would equate it to World War III. We've been covering this in the other parts of this Domino series, so definitely check those out. The instruction scripture tells us, though, is when you know you're on the threshold of the great day of the Lord, the tribulation about to start, that sudden destruction that's coming at the very beginning, World War III, you need to be watching and you need to be sober, and you need to make sure you are not sleeping, caught up in dreams and delusions, which usually come about by getting emotionally attached to nations or political figures. The Apostle Paul tells us that we will need to be sober. When you hear them say the peace and safety and peace and security and peace and stability, all these things that are crucially being said here at this late hour, especially by Trump and Netanyahu and the world leaders, we need to be watching and we need to be very sober. Do not be emotionally attached to those individuals, the children of darkness who are saying this. Scripture warns you, they are going to be lying to you. There's a lot of lies going on at this time. We've covered this before, and Revelation 17:12-13 tells us all this should be considered as scripting. There are individuals who are deliberately in power wanting to give their power and authority to the Antichrist, who's about to show up right at the beginning of the tribulation. So Scripture gives us these clues to help us be sober with what we see. And this is also how we can see the day approaching if we are sober. Over the weekend, March 21st, that's when Trump put out his threat to Iran that they had 48 hours from that exact point in time where if they did not fully open the Strait of Hormuz, he was going to obliterate their various power plants, starting with the biggest one first. And this definitely upset the markets, got a lot of people concerned because that would be a major escalation, not going any further back. And Iran even plainly said, we will retaliate if you attack our power plants. And they even showed different satellite maps of all the places that they would prioritize hitting too. And so a lot of people are very concerned that this is a very public threat. And part of being sober is recognizing what is being put out very bombastically for the public to be consuming here at this late hour. Not just Americans, but throughout the world. And since this is from the bully pulpit of the office of the President of the United States, this is a high-level threat, equivalent almost to a nuclear attack, because you're threatening to destroy the energy infrastructure of an entire nation. And so that would have a huge ramification on civilians and hospitals and food and all sorts of things like that. So from the Iranian point of view, this would be an existential, dire national emergency if such an attack was launched on them of that magnitude. And so accordingly, they would respond in kind. And so a lot of people were wondering what would happen. And then right before the time was up, Donald Trump on Monday released another tweet that he was holding off on the attack. I am pleased to report that the United States of America and the country of Iran have had over the last 2 days very good and productive conversations regarding a complete and total resolution of our hostilities in the Middle East. Based on the tenor and tone of these in-depth, detailed, and constructive conversations, which will continue throughout the week, I have instructed the Department of War to postpone any and all military strikes against Iranian power plants and energy infrastructure for a 5-day period, subject to the success of the ongoing meetings and discussions. So he claims that negotiations are in progress with Iran, and because of those supposed negotiations, they're going to hold off for 5 days attacking the plants and energy infrastructure, subject to the success of this ongoing negotiation that they are supposedly having. So in other words, at the end of 5 days, if things don't get better, the attacks will still take place. So of course that would bring us to the end of Friday, the end of the close of the market too. So there's a lot of fog of war right now, a lot of confusion, and again, the need for us to be sober. Don't take anything that Donald Trump has to say at face value, especially when you consider his past performance and how he has dealt with Iran during negotiations too. You should assume that he's lying and getting ready to backstab him. And based on the statements by Iran that we have seen just over the course of this short war, we know they have zero trust in Donald Trump whatsoever, and they have zero interest in negotiation. We knew that even before he got to this point. So anyone sober enough should be able to know and be very suspect that these negotiations aren't even taking place. For some reason, Donald Trump is trying to buy some time. because he also knows if he does attack the power plants and energy infrastructure, that will have huge irreversible effects and cause a lot of damage for our allies in the area too. So either he's trying to buy some time or continuing his bluffing negotiation, his style of negotiation. Of course, this has now started a 5-day period up through Friday where people are watching in anticipation that this could get better. That's the public perception. They think, well, some negotiations going on. Obviously, we don't know all the details, so maybe this can get better. But anyone watching the direction of this and having an informed and sober perspective knows this is not going to get better. And from a scriptural perspective, we know the ones who have been saying peace and safety, led by this individual himself, that tells us sudden destruction is coming. That's already baked into the cake because it's prophesied, and we're even warned about it, that when this guy starts saying this and the world really starts talking about it, sudden destruction is coming. We don't know exactly down to the granular detail it's coming, but seeing the course of events, we have a pretty good idea the way it's going, and it has been pretty much on course so far too. In 2 videos ago, I warned you that Trump, based on the way we see things progressing, we are expecting him to do something royally stupid that's really going to upset the rest of the world to where they are forced to do an intervention to stop him. And so we see that he's still holding out this threat against Iran to attack their energy plants and their energy infrastructure, which will, if he follows through that, the ramifications on the world supply chain and just the cascading effects that are even being felt now before that happens, the world will be forced to intervene because that will be irreparable damage. Already the damage from the start of this war with the Strait of Hormuz being closed, it's already going to take months for the supply chains to recover, and the oil flows and the oil product flows and the fertilizer and helium and natural gas and all that. They already say it's going to take months just from the damage already. But if this happens, it's going to be baked into the cake that you're pretty much on the verge of World War III within a few hours once that happens. And so that's also why we're looking at this event, because we know sudden destruction is coming. They're going to be talking very heavily about peace and safety, peace and stability, peace and security. There's variations of that same idea because that's what governments crave so much. That's what they need to have. They need to have stability for their economy, for the supply chains to hum along. For civilization to keep going, you have to have peace and safety. But when major events such as this war in Iran, which affects the Strait of Hormuz, what 2 things are affected for everybody in the neighborhood across the world? That's peace and stability, peace and safety. So the whole world is having a vested interest in what's going on right here, and these threats, which are still threatened to be carried out toward the end of this week. And people have a lot of questions right now is if these negotiations are real or not. Is that the possibility that things could be okay? Or if it's not, and they're typically known to be liars and backstabbers in the negotiation process, and the United States has pretty much thrown away any goodwill we ever had diplomatically with countries because of that recently. People worldwide know this could either turn out really good or it will be really, really bad. There's like no middle ground. And so that's why a lot of people are really interested in this. When just watching it soberly, we have a good idea of the way it's going to go, particularly since this threat is still ongoing. Let's take a look at the timeline. Remember, review it every single day. You can find links in the description box, especially in light of the commemorations on the biblical calendar, just reminding us of Passover and resurrection coming up. There's a lot of things that we are told to remember, particularly the promises regarding Christ's coming again, which were given around the same time. We covered those in our last video, so keeping in mind what's been set in motion by these individuals who know sudden destruction is coming, by these same individuals who intend to give their power to the Antichrist. And so everything does seem to be on track prophetically and brings us right to a time where we already saw the day approaching, how the Lord has brought us on this celestial learning journey right to this spot too. So even before this war started, we had a lot of expectation. We had even marked this already out as a high watch time. So that's why we weren't surprised that this war started, and definitely seems to fit the bill for how sudden destruction is coming and how the world has a plausible expectation that it has a human cause behind it. Which also means that some humans are also going to be scapegoated and thrown under the bus, blamed for it too. So let's zoom in on the timeline. Trump gave his initial threat on March 21st, went through 22nd for the 48 hours. Then on Monday, that's when he claimed there's a ceasefire talks in progress potentially. They were negotiating for it. There wasn't an actual ceasefire in place, but there was talks about it, he claimed. And so this also fits the peace and safety narrative that we're warned about, because right here in this whole situation, which is threatening peace and security, this same guy is talking about, hey, there's potential for peace to bring about stability and safety and security in this whole world restored again after this major disruption. So you see the same subject being brought up again. We've seen before and shown how these pepperings of peace and safety keep coming up. So here we shouldn't be surprised that as it's ramping up in intensity, as these birth pangs are getting more intense and these contractions are coming more and more, that we still hear these calls of peace and safety. They're still talking about these exact subjects. Right here while the situation's getting worse. And that should sober us as Christians as we see prophecy. That should remind us that despite whatever they're saying, sudden destruction's coming. When they flap their gums about peace and safety, and they're also the ones who cause the situation, from Scripture, we can already write it down. Sudden destruction's coming. And we already know we're into birth pangs, which tells us the baby's not that far off. We are very, very close to sudden destruction. And so, again, when we see how they're talking, and still talking about peace and safety now, trying to draw this out and stretch it out, postpone it just a little bit more, we know based on the tempo and what he's also threatening to do, the baby ain't that far away. Again, we don't know the day or hour, neither do they, but there is a very good idea that it's right here in this window, right around the same commemorative time of expectation, apparently, as when Christ was officially revealed the first time at his triumphal entry. So we shouldn't be surprised that because they don't know the day or hour, there's going to be some postponing. There's going to be a little drawing out because they want to bring the world up to the threshold. They won't be able to initiate the sun destruction until the rapture, until Jesus Christ is revealed. Because up until that moment, it will be just like the days of Noah and Lot, remember? Life will still be going on like normal up until the very moment that Jesus Christ comes. But the world will be very close, right at the threshold of sudden destruction, right when all those characteristics are about to change. So they're going to bring the narrative, the story, the plausible explanation for why sudden destruction is about to happen, why the world is about to see so many bright flashes up in the sky. They want this explanation on the public mind and in the news, so they're going to bring it up right to the doorstep and then try to draw it out as long as possible, while at the same time the contractions of the birthing pangs are going to be increasing in intensity and coming faster and faster. So they're going to be trying to draw it out as long as possible at the very last moment. So keep that in mind as you see how the threats are raised. The intensity is raised, yet at the same time they're trying to draw it out as long as possible. So that's what we keep in mind from a biblical perspective as we're sober here. Some of the indications that negotiations aren't really in play and he's just lying through his teeth are that attacks from both sides are still ongoing. Very significant impacts too. Israeli military completed a wave of extensive strikes targeting production sites across Iran, including in Isfahan, where reports that gas facilities were hit. Iran has kept up its attacks on Israel. Iran has reportedly struck U.S. bases and Gulf states, including Kuwait and Saudi Arabia. Iran's state news agency said that the U.S.-Israeli strikes hit near Iran's Bushehr nuclear plant. The second time in a week, there was no technical damage. It just hit very nearby. And the UN's atomic energy inspectors also confirmed that a structure 350 meters from the reactor was hit and destroyed. So it came very close. So we take these ongoing attacks in light of what Trump is saying. We see the energy and infrastructure attacks are still ongoing. If you were negotiating with somebody in good faith, you would hold off on those type of attacks, especially when your main threat is that you would be attacking the power plants. And yet we see those attacks keep continuing. So from Iran's perspective, they know that you have no intention of holding off. The attacks just keep going and you actually still are targeting our energy infrastructure. And of course, attacks are also happening on Israel. But you'll hear in American media that, they're just firing fewer and fewer missiles. But what they don't like to dwell on a lot is those fewer and fewer missiles are also having pretty good impact rates too. They're getting through because the interceptors are running out of interceptor missiles. So there's been some major impacts in Israel that they're really not broadcasting a lot, except for some of these, but more missiles are getting through than they like to let on. And these few, even though there are few missiles, the few missiles that do come through have caused greater damage than what has been happening before, because they're now starting to use more powerful missiles now that the interceptors are mostly run out. They used up their old missiles first to kind of drain down the missile defense interceptors, and then once those have been basically mostly taken out, then they can fire the really good stuff, and with just a few missiles getting through, they can make large impacts that have a great disruption in Israeli society. Just a few days ago, Israel had attacked a place very close to the nuclear power plant, so Iran responded with a very powerful missile hit right near Israel's nuclear Domino city, and the missile made a huge impact and really caught a lot of people's attention that the missiles that Iran is using now, even though they're firing fewer, they got more punch. They got a lot more punch. So more damage is being done in the Mona area and then Arad as well. You're seeing the intensity of the impacts increase, even though they're using fewer missiles, because there's fewer interceptions happening. And this is also something to keep in mind too. At the beginning of the war, between February 28th and March 15th, you saw Iran targeting a whole bunch of different countries in the area. The Gulf Coast cities and Israel and just the whole neighborhood. And it was the onset of the war, and so a lot of attention was given on the military sites, particularly the radar sites and missile interceptor sites. But then as the war has gone on, March 16th and beyond, Iran's been attacking the Gulf Coast countries less and Israel more. And so you can see on this chart here, the bulk of the missile attacks and also the drone attacks that's counted into strikes. They do launch a number of their drone attacks. Most of their attention now is on Israel, but they're peppered out, but they're also of higher intensity too. So now that they have taken care of some of the military sites in the area and just the U.S. bases and the U.S. threat to them, now they're focusing on Israel, who is the closer threat. And Iran also knows most of their interceptors are gone. So that's why you also see them firing fewer missiles, but they still get through. And so that's why Iran, they can lower the number of missiles that are launched and drones that are launched, because they know they can have the same impact disrupting Israeli society just with the few that do get through. That's all they need to do. They just need to launch just enough to disrupt Israel's society. Keep the populace running to the bunkers. Keep the populace in a state of disruption. It really disrupts society just sending a few missiles and drones to the area. But these are missiles that have huge impact, and you're also probably going to see them using stronger missiles here in the days ahead too. But we're seeing these attacks continue while supposedly Trump is saying, well, there's been 2 days of negotiation. Well, neither side is demonstrating that they are in any way trying to demonstrate good faith. So that also tells you that negotiations aren't taking place. It's just something that Trump has made up. Despite Trump's peace talk claims, U.S.-Israeli attacks continue to hit Iran. Huge explosions were reported overnight in the Iranian capital Tehran and other cities. Iranian media reported on Tuesday that Israeli-U.S. strikes hit 2 gas facilities and a pipeline hours after Trump postponed planned attacks on power infrastructure. An attack also hit the gas pipeline of a power plant in the country's southwest. So again, the facts on the ground, what's actually happening, kind of goes counter to what Trump is talking about and trying to give their impression about, which tells you negotiations haven't been taking place. He's trying to buy more time. Iran claims Israel-U.S. attacked near nuclear power plant. No technical damage or casualties, though. And this was the second time within the week that Israel attacked near their power plant. And so expect further retaliations in kind near Israel's as well, too. Again, if you're in negotiations, you don't target certain areas that are really going to tick the enemy off. So obviously that tells you negotiations aren't happening whatsoever. But then you also see a bombastic speech by Trump in the White House press conferences in the Oval Office that just happened, where the Secretary of War, Hegseth, said, and that's why we see ourselves as part of this negotiation process as well, too. He's talking about the military. We negotiate with bombs. And his little speech there in the Oval Office was very bombastic, very juvenile too. But he was making it very clear. Right when Trump's saying, yes, we're in the negotiation process for a ceasefire, then he brings the Secretary of War over who says, we negotiate with bombs. So they're giving the greater impression that no matter what is said diplomatically, facts on the ground give the stronger message. which is, no, there isn't going to be a ceasefire. And then, of course, Iran's response was, we are negotiating with the child-killing aggressors through impact-based operations. In other words, missiles. We're letting the missiles do our negotiation for us. Because, again, it's facts on the ground. They can see the attitude of what America is doing toward them, what Israel's doing to them. So they said in response, we'll just let our missiles do the negotiation because that's the only negotiation that's going to happen. Iran refuses peace talks with Donald Trump's backstabbing negotiators. Donald Trump keeps talking about the two individuals who were involved in negotiations the first time, claims they're in negotiations this time, where they are the last people that Iran wants to talk to because they backstabbed him at the two previous rounds of negotiations, and they know that. And they also know, especially Jared Kushner's ties with Netanyahu and the one who's attacking them. So they have no interest whatsoever in talking to these individuals. Iran's foreign minister said to China's foreign minister, Tehran will defend its sovereignty from the U.S.-Israeli attack, quote, until all objectives are achieved and the enemy is made to regret its violent aggression, end quote. And that's what they've been making clear for several days now, that they're not interested in negotiation whatsoever. They're not picking up the phone for the U.S. or Israel. Iran holds all the cards right now because they control the Strait of Hormuz. And not until America and U.S. get to the point where they will never do this again. So there is no negotiation from Iran's perspective, and they've made this very, very clear. But we still see the worldwide impacts going on. Every single day that this strait stays closed, the impacts get worse and worse. And so that's why Trump will have to do something eventually soon. He will have to do something bombastic, something a show of force to show that he is in control. Right now, the facts on the ground, Iran controls the whole situation. But Trump, he can only talk at the moment until he has to do something to show that he is truly in charge, America is truly in charge, and they can save the day, whatnot. So he's going to have to do something pretty soon. And the nations of the world are also going to pretty soon tell him that you got to fix this here pretty soon because things are getting worse. Every single day that this keeps extending out, it gets worse and worse. So something will have to happen soon, and it'll probably have to happen through Trump because he's going to have to demonstrate that he is in control of the situation, supposedly. How are things unfolding in the world? United Airlines warns of 20% fare hike to cope with oil surge. Because of the jet fuel prices just going through the roof, basically, they're saying pretty soon we're going to have to raise the price of airline tickets at least by 20% just so we can break even because of the jet fuel cost increases. So you're going to see huge increases in ticket prices and anything that has to move by planes. So pretty soon, we're talking about huge impacts on supply chains and also costs that are going to be passed on to customers, all because of this one disruption. Shell CEO warns Iran conflict could cripple fuel supplies before oil. And he's warning you got to worry about the oil products that are produced from oil. You got to worry about that more than actual oil. It's getting the oil products that are going to be your most concern. Quote, the world supply of fuel is tightening in South Asia and will soon get squeezed in Northeast Asia, with Europe set to begin seeing shortfalls in April due to the Iran war, Shell CEO said. Northeast Asia and Europe, they're going to start feeling the effects of this. They're going to start seeing some shortfalls in April. That's just a few days away because things are so tight already in the cascading effects. Shell CEO warns road fuel crunch to follow jet squeeze over Hormuz blockade. And this is what you got to watch out for. The road fuel prices and the jet fuel prices, that's what's going to be climbing through the roof because of the tightness. In Europe, jet cargo prices more than doubled to hit an all-time high on March 19th. The product crunch, the CEO said, stems from physical supply chain disruptions that originated in South Asia and have since rippled throughout Southeast and Northeast Asia, with Europe in the crosshairs should the conflict drag on. More than half of the world's refineries, with some 12 million barrels per day of capacity, are directly exposed to the conflict, either due to proximity or dependence on Middle East crudes. More than half of the world's refineries are exposed to this problem here. Protective stockpiling, though, by different countries, he warns, risks turning a manageable supply strain into a more severe dislocation. While the U.S. has so far ruled out a crude export ban in response to the crisis, China has banned its shipments of refined products, and European countries, including Hungary, Slovakia, and Romania, have also shut in supplies. On the supply side, France and the Czech Republic have pushed to postpone refinery maintenance and boost domestic production. Philippines says grounding planes a distinct possibility. Because again, the shortages and the high price of jet fuel, this is an energy national emergency. That's one of the declarations they put out. Because the flow of getting these refined products is what's of a concern. And just the prices going through the roof and the availability. Australia is definitely feeling this, or will be feeling it very soon too. Fuel supply heads for a cliff at end of April as petrol prices in Australia hit record highs. Australia's fuel supplies head for a cliff at the end of April when the Asian refineries that deliver 80% of Australia's supply exhaust their inventories due to the Iran war oil crisis. Australia gets a lot of its fuel supplies from Asian refineries, and those Asian refineries, though, require the oil that comes from the Middle East. So when you have one out of commission, then it has a knock-on effect. And so pretty soon they're saying at the end of April, the one's going to be running out. And so that has a knock-on effect for Australia too, which means Australia is going to be running into some shortfalls very, very soon. And there's speculation that probably right after Easter, there's going to start being some fuel rationing in Australia just because of these shortages that are coming down the pipe very quickly. Speaking of pipe, Reese pushes 36% price rise on plastic pipes and building cost shock. Major construction suppliers, including the country's biggest plumbing goods business, are raising prices by up to a third as the war in Iran crunches the shipment of raw materials and puts pressure on building costs. Reese, which supplies bathroom materials to home builders and tradespeople, told customers they would be forced to pass on cost rises of 36% on plastic pipes from next month because shipments of oil and resin needed for manufacturing had been disrupted. 36% potential increases. Financial Review this week reported steel manufacturers were also raising price on some products by between 15% and 25%, mirrors issues created by disruptions during the pandemic in 2020. At the time, higher prices and supply problems led to budget blowouts on major projects, exacerbating an existing shortage in new homes. Reese, which has more than 600 outlets in Australia, wrote to customers that the conflict in the Middle East, now in its fourth week, had left the industry, quote, suffering from a lack of supply of raw material, fuel and freight options, which is driving costs upward, adding immense pressures. Okay, so this is some of the ripple effects, but it's a lot of background key players that most people aren't aware of or don't think about too much. The cost of raw material, but then also the supply of raw material, where to get it from, the oil products and the petroleum products, the resins, fuel and freight options, all that makes major changes to production. All of this is driving costs upward. So then, of course, higher prices combined with supply problems, they're pointing out how some parallels with 2020. That affects major projects. Prices go up through the roof, budget's blown, you can't finish your project. There's so many problems just because of the Strait of Hormuz situation right now. And of course, from a Christian perspective, what does this affect? Building. Remember, that's one of the qualifiers of Days of Noah Lot. They are still building. Building is still going on. So now you're starting to see some upward pressure, but you can also see this is the problems that's just from the situation now today. If this gets worse and Trump follows through on his threats, you are going to see all of these problems absolutely go through the roof. And so that changes our perspective on this time frame of the Days of Noah a lot too, of realizing this can be really shortened up really soon if things get bad here, which tells us that time is very short. We can see how things are already going and already cascading and getting worse. If it makes it worse by actions of Trump this week, then that will greatly shorten the potential time frame for the sun destruction. Europe-bound LNG cargoes divert to Asia amid Middle East supply disruptions. Around 11 LNG tankers originally bound for Europe have diverted to Asia since 3rd of March, according to market data, as buyers respond to tightening supply and rising spot prices following the closure of the Strait of Hormuz and outages at Qatar's Ras Laffan LNG complex. So this is another monkey wrench that causes more headache in the supply chain is all of a sudden because of shortages of these products, the price goes up and demand for those products is higher in certain areas like Asia. And so Europe, which needs LNG, which needs gas, which needs some of these products that are suddenly being shortened because of the supply, you have these suppliers who are shipping out from the United States, but instead of going to Europe, they're being diverted to Asia because the shortages in Asia means those fuel and those products command a higher price. So the shippers and those who are paying for these boatloads of LNG, they know they can get far more money by going to Asia. So instead of going to Europe, they shortchange Europe and they go to Asia. So as the supply chains shorten and the availability shortens, you're going to see, even though there may be fuel products available, they will probably go to where the market demands who's paying the most money for it. Not to who needs it, who is paying the most for it. And so you're going to see greater stress in Europe, who has a lot of dependency on gas, and they've shot themselves in the foot regarding Russia. But then some of their other suppliers who they were thinking of relying on, such as the United States, they're finding out that the product is being sold before it can get to them. It's going out to other markets too. So it's a whole supply and demand issue. Supply is tightening up, but demand is increasing. So you got to make sure you get to the front of line, which means you're also going to be paying through the nose to get it too. Russia stops ammonium nitrate exports for 1 month amid global supply crunch. Russia, which controls up to 40% of the global trade in ammonium nitrate, said on Tuesday it will stop exports of the fertilizer for 1 month until April 21st to ensure a sufficient supply during the spring planting season. Russia, a major fertilizer exporter, lacks the capacity to boost production this year amid a global supply crunch caused by the closure of the Strait of Hormuz, through which 24% of the global trade in ammonia, an ingredient of ammonium nitrate, passes. Russia produces a quarter of the world's ammonium nitrate. Okay, so this highly important fertilizer, Russia is stopping its exports because it says, well, hey, we need to focus on our spring planting here, our domestic supply first. So Russia, which produces a quarter of the world's ammonium nitrate, suddenly stops exporting. That has a huge ripple effect for farmers, particularly who are dependent at the spring planting season, which again has a huge impact. That's another qualifier. Planting and building, you're starting to see these impacts, and that's just from what has happened so far. If this gets worse, you're really going to see countries start locking down. Because as one country starts having export bans, then other countries start panicking and realizing, hey, we can't get what we need either through the supply chains because they've stopped supplying. So we really need to stop exporting what we got because we don't have much to begin with. And then their neighbor says, well, they're locking up too, and they're locking up. So that means we won't be able to get our supplies that we need from other places. So we need to conserve what we got too. So one export ban and one lockdown leads to other countries. It starts a cascading effect of lockdowns and rationing. And so that's what you're going to see here pretty soon too. It's already bad. But once they start locking down more, you're going to see them happening faster and faster. And with the higher demand that comes during those lockdown times, the prices will absolutely go through the roof then too. All of this, as the days of Noah were, so shall the coming of the Son of Man be. When Jesus Christ is revealed, the days of Noah and Lot will still be going on right on the threshold of sun destruction. They will still be living. The wheels of society will still be turning. They'll still be eating and drinking. There will still be food on the shelves. The worldwide currency hasn't collapsed yet. People are still buying and selling. The stock market's still humming along. There are some disruptions. There will be some pausing. But things are still spinning along. People are marrying, still making long-term family plans. People are still planting and still making those investments of time, expecting a return. People are still building, although there may be stresses in the construction and supply industry. The wheels of society will still be going on, Scripture tells us. So again, this hedges our understanding that the world will be very close to the threshold of these qualifiers being disrupted. And so that's why we're watching them so much. Why is the fertilizer so important? Why is the fuel supply so important? Why is material costs so important and jet fuel prices so important? Because this is a criteria that tells us how close we are to the days of Noah and Lot running out. Even thus shall it be in the days when the Son of Man is revealed. So we're watching all this together. The cause for peace and safety by the individual who's causing the largest disruption to the Strait of Hormuz and the whole oil industry in history. And we know that the rest of these qualifiers, they're built on a house of cards. You start knocking out some of these cards, the rest is going to fall pretty quickly. So that tells us the sun destruction ain't that far off. We already see these birthing pangs where the cards are starting to fall. So the house it can't stay up too much longer. And just based on the cards that we see falling, we can tell that the cascading effect is just going to increase really quickly, and sun destruction is happening pretty soon where everything just falls apart because the whole system doesn't work anymore, particularly if Trump follows through on his threat and makes things really, really worse. Again, like we've talked about in our previous videos, we've seen the attacks intensifying by the U.S. and Israel against Iran. And here with this recent threat, Trump is really going to be pushing Iran into a corner where it's going to have to do something drastic, or something drastic on the world stage is going to happen. a back off threat to Trump and Israel, basically tell them, back off, stop this, you are messing up the whole world. Iran is probably going to respond in kind if Trump attacks all the power plants. They're going to respond in kind, destroy a lot of energy infrastructure, and really make America and Israel rethink, also cause the world to rethink of, hey, y'all need to stop this right now. And it will cause the world to intervene because things are really getting out of hand and the house of cards is falling faster and faster. And if they have any hope of preventing a total collapse, they will have to stop the U.S. and Israel. They will have to stop this chain of escalation by either side. So we've covered that before. We are very close to that. Particularly if Trump follows through on this threat to attack the power plants and energy infrastructure, you're going to see a lot happen really quickly after that. So this is, again, why you need to study the timeline. Look at the threats that are hanging over the world right now. Look at how the situation on the ground shows negotiations aren't happening. A lot of that is for public consumption, just to hold out the days of no, I'm not, as long as possible. Make people think maybe things will turn out okay. Maybe things can turn for the better. Maybe we can avert and get away from World War III. So there will be deception, there will be lies, because they are drawing it out, because they do not know the day or hour either. But the whole narrative is bring the world's expectation and their perception that yes, we are really close to bad things happening, and if somebody does this and this, that will definitely cause a whole cascading event, and that will definitely explain why there's suddenly bright flashes on the horizon, which they will take to be World War III, breaking out nuclear war. That is the narrative the children of darkness want to have in the world's minds right here at this late hour. They will draw it out, but we will also see the birth pangs increase. So expect more impacts on the energy infrastructure, the power infrastructure for Iran and the Gulf Coast countries, Israel too as well. You're going to see more birth pangs. But that also tells us the baby ain't that far off too. And just reminds us, as we are sober and we are vigilant watching, have a biblical perspective. Be very sober. Know the conclusion. Know the character of the people who are saying the peace and safety calls and where this is leading. Again, review the timeline. I would also review our videos just to recover some of the commemorative events coming up in the Bible passages, the promises that Christ made right in this whole context that we see we're just a few days away from ourselves right now. You can find all these links in the description box. Check them out. Be ready when to watch Running for the Prize in the timeline. Friend, we are running out of time. The birth pangs are increasing. That tells us sun destruction is coming. We can see the day approaching. We are looking up. We are lifting up our heads for our redemption. Draweth nigh. We see so many signs in the world. We see so many signs in the news. These are the trumpet calls at midnight that tell us the bridegroom cometh. Go ye out to meet him. So friend, let's rise up. Let's trim up. Let's brighten up. Let's gird up. And let's go out to meet our Savior. Hearing him, heeding and obeying him, loving him and serving him, first and highest above all else, drawing nigh with a true heart till he comes. Maranatha.